Welcome to another episode of Tank Talks, your personal think tank for all things startups and venture capital. I'm your host, Matt Cohen, founder and managing partner at Ripple Ventures. On today's show, we welcome Pukar Hamal, founder and CEO of SecurityPal, to discuss how startups can prepare for that dreaded security review. Pukar shares his amazing background starting out at Stanford, where he handed out Square readers to thousands of students in 2010 before making his way into the startup world. Next, Pukar shares what it was like working for two companies that were acquired and what were some of the biggest lessons he learned during his time as a venture scout at Craft Ventures. Next, we dig into how Pukar decided to launch his next venture, SecurityPal, as a bootstrap startup and how he was able to win some incredible customers like Figma, Loom, and Airtable and reach over $1 million in sales before raising his first venture round. Finally, Pukar explains how he was able to raise a $21 million Series A round led by Craft Ventures alongside A16Z investors without a pitch deck. But before we get started today, as our listeners probably know by now, the team at Ripple is always focused on helping our founders and portfolio companies find the best partners to work with. And when it comes to corporate finance and cash management, there's nobody we recommend more than the team at Jeeves. At Ripple, we manage all our fund expenses and employee credit cards using Jeeves. The team at Jeeves helped me get my team set up with physical and virtual cards in days. I was able to allow my teammates to expense items in multiple currencies, allowing them to pay for anything, anywhere, at any time. We weren't asked for any personal guarantees or to pay any setup or monthly SaaS fees. Not only does Jeeves save us time, but they also give us up to 3% cash back on our purchases, including expenses like Google, Facebook, or AWS every month. The best part is Jeeves puts up the cash and you settle once every 30 days in any currency you want, unlike some other corporate card companies that make you prepay every month. Listeners of Tank Talks can get set up today with a demo of Jeeves and take advantage of our Tank Talks special with a $250 sign-up bonus and skip the waitlist that already has thousands of companies waiting on it by visiting tryjeeves.com/Tank Talks. Use referral code Tank Talks to get set up today. Now let's jump into the tank for this week's episode with Pukar Hamal from SecurityPal. Thanks for joining us in the tank today, Pukar.
Great to be here, Matt. Thank you so much.
You know, Pukar, you have a really interesting background and you've held some exciting roles during your time working in tech and startups. You know, you were early ambassador for Square, handing out Square readers while you're joining your classmates at Stanford, all the way to working for some amazing philanthropic organizations, as well as a handful of co-founder and business leader roles at a bunch of startups. So to kick things off, it would be great if you can give our audience a brief background on yourself and how you made your way into the world of startups and technology.
I think if you go to school like in Silicon Valley, right, especially at in 2009 when I entered Stanford, there was just lots of talk about startups, funding, fundraising, a lot of people starting companies. Evan Spiegel had started Snapchat. He was like a class above mine. There's just like tremendous entrepreneurs that have done amazing things. And I didn't really set out to build a company, but I did want to be part of that ecosystem. And I felt like it was a very unique and different way of having impact. And especially as a young person, you're trying to figure out what you want to do in life. And so a lot of the things that I was trying to do was how can I have impact? How can I sort of change the world? That's sort of how a lot of educational institutions try to get their students and alumni to be focused on changing the world. And startups felt like a very interesting way to have impact really rapidly. And so that's how I ended up finding my way to the world of tech and startups. I probably approached it a little bit differently, which was I'm not a software engineer. I took a couple of computer science classes at Stanford. It's sort of it's a rite of passage almost to take CS 106A, which is an introductory course. I don't know if they still call it that, but I was more interested in go-to-market. I was always more fascinated by, you obviously building something is super important, but how do you actually scale it? Why am I using this product? Why am I using this software? Why am I not using something else, right? Whether it's a MacBook, why am I using a MacBook and not a Microsoft at that point? Or why am I using this software versus that software? And that led me to the world of understanding, it's actually distribution and it's go to market. And I had this feeling that that was going to be more important because the cost of developing software was decreasing rapidly, especially with the advent of AWS and cloud computing in general. And so I was like, well, what's the next bottleneck? And GTM and distribution really felt like the next bottleneck. And so I started my career post Stanford and some philanthropic gigs later. I joined an early stage company called TalentBin as a sales rep, really as a sales development rep. Very proud of my work there. and my time there. I still call it like one of my favorite jobs because it was very simple. You just call people and schedule meetings, and you try to pitch them on your product. It was a talent acquisition product at that time. We were a product that helped companies identify engineers that you couldn't find on LinkedIn, right? Like there was a lot of additional data on GitHub or Stack Overflow or all this other stuff. How do you find like those hidden engineers? That was really interesting. Learned a lot about how to refine your pitch, how to get somebody's attention really quickly, product marketing, sales operations, all that. And that led me to my next gig at Teamable as I joined as like a later stage co-founder to really help drive go-to-market efforts there. And learned a lot from scaling that and successfully to Series A beyond and its eventual acquisition to a company named Top Funnel, which then ended up rebranding their company and product to Teamable. So that's my journey in tech thus far. And then eventually I ended up taking a little bit of time off to explore this idea with SecurityPal. And here I am.
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, really exciting and interesting, going to Stanford, seeing people a class above you like Evan Spiegel go and build Snap, and also just hearing professors share their experiences with prior students. There's so many things you can choose from being in such a hotbed like Stanford, change the world, build the next Uber, whatever it is, or go down the sort of, change the world philanthropically way and having impact. And you ended up in a bunch of different positions and then landed at the go to market. What was it about besides the how or why people buy certain things like a MacBook, besides that really interested you going to work as a, early stage sort of sales leader at TalentBin?
One, I wanted to break into tech, right? Like you sort of, I remember reading this book called like the Farnsworth invention. I think it was like a long time ago, but it was about like Philo T. Farnsworth, one of the guys that like invented the television. Probably doesn't get as much credit for it as he should. It was like it was really interesting. There was like this story about he was like one of the people that like reinvented like the ignition key lock system because all the Model T Fords back in the day had like the same key. And so like if you went out drinking with friends, you'd like come home in like a different car because like the key just opened all the, and so it was really interesting. He eventually ended up learning a lot about like how like he invented the television, like thought about like supply chains a lot. He was also like really inspired by like Ford, right? Like the way in which like the Ford Motor Company just like redesigned factories. Like I always wanted to apply like engineering principles to like go to market. I was always fascinated by like I thought go to market was like there's really like a process behind it. It's a lot more operational than we think. I always say like, engineers program machines and they program code. I think like, without sounding like sinister, GTM people program humans and like you can sort of like program them to like improve efficiency and like make the world a better place. Right. And so, and how do you program people? You like share ideas, you provide evidence, you align with some of their emotions maybe, and that allows you to like put a better product out there that makes like their lives better and like their company's lives better. So I was always like more interested because like humans are always going to be a fundamental part, hopefully, of how the world evolves, and just like really fascinated by go to market because it just felt like, well, you've built this thing, like how and there's other like if you can build it, other people can build it too, right? There's nothing like uniquely. Certainly there's like really great technologists out there and I don't want to take anything away from them. But if one human can build it, you can sort of believe that other humans could also build it. Well, what about making sure that like people actually use it and you learn from the feedback and who's going to be the person that like takes the feedback first and runs with it and continues to evolve the product. Always more fascinated by that go-to-market side of the house than maybe like the pure engineering side of the house.
Yeah, I mean, it makes perfect sense. Richard Branson, I remember, had a quote saying, there's never been an entrepreneur who can build a product, sell a product, and also fundraise for a company all in one person. And there's a reason why there's great engineers, great go-to-market people, and great storytellers. And that's why you need all of them to make a successful business. But I'm still thinking about this Ford Model T example. It now makes sense that they only had one key for all the hundreds of Ford Model Ts that were just sitting around when people were going out for dinner. And the only way you knew if it was yours, it was if, the chickens in the back were yours, or if you had some other car seat or whatever they had back then, a bale of hay, I don't know, to notify which one was yours, because I'm sure they weren't hanging dice from their, rearview mirrors to know which ones were theirs. But I digress. Those two companies, though, that you worked for were TalentBin, as you mentioned, which was acquired by Monster Worldwide, and Teamable, those were some pretty nice exits to have as your journey into startups and technology began as an operator. So I got to ask, what were some of the biggest lessons you learned from those two experiences and going through those acquisitions?
I mean, TalentBin, I was so young and, I was like a frontline sales rep. And so I think it was like interesting to sort of be like, oh, like this is actually something that happens. Like once a startup builds something and it has value in the market, it like gets the attention of like bigger companies. And it's sort of like an exercise in sort of understanding, oh, like if you create enterprise value in the world, it is appreciated and there's like inherent value in that. And that leads to, obviously like rewards for like the founders. But, when I talk to the founders of TalentBin, I'm still friends with them. They're investors in my company at SecurityPal today. You could also see like, there was some sense of like self-actualization for them in the sense that like they built something that had impact in the world. It took a lot of lessons from there, right? Like what are the ways in which I wanted to like self-actualize? What is the impact that I wanted to uniquely have in the world? And then in terms of my time at Teamable, the lessons there were really around. There was like a key lesson that I applied to like SecurityPal. Teamable is a really interesting product. What it does is at that time, it connected with like people's networks, like social networks and professional networks, and it surfaced referrals for open jobs at your company. So it's like a referral matching tool. And we're like, now there's a bunch of companies that are trying to do this. We were like one of the earlier ones that had sort of like figured this out. And one of the key lessons was there's sort of this idea of like before product market fit, there's sort of like this idea of idea market fit. Like, does this idea make sense in the market when you present it in slides and when I'm talking to you in a conversation like this? And if you sort of like confuse idea market fit for product market fit, you can end up scaling before you've actually built a product and learned some of the lessons. And so I think from Teamable's standpoint, like one of the key lessons there was we probably like tried to scale before product market fit. Like our idea really resonated. You could pitch Teamable to everybody and it resonated. But did we quite execute on it exactly the way that idea deserved? And I think there was much to be desired on that side. Although we were still successful, we had some of the world's most incredible companies using Teamable at the time. We powered a lot of engineering hiring for Lyft. We helped Uber hire a ton of engineers in their self-driving car facilities out in Pittsburgh. So there was a lot of like traction that we had, but I really appreciated like what product market fit really meant. And then I think one of the things that's really great about startups, in startups, you have to make a lot of decisions really quickly. And so there's this idea of like decision throughput. And so if you think about like, how do humans get better? They get better through practice and they get better through like repeated exposure, going through that loop, right? Feedback loop over and over again. And so one of the great things about startups is you make a lot of decisions. You go through that loop maybe faster than in a bigger company. And then so like you end up like learning a lot about like, maybe you make like 10 years worth of decisions in 1 year or 10 years worth of like pivots in 1 year. And that teaches you a lot about just the raw process of making those decisions and going through that exercise of building a company, but also teaches you a lot about people. It teaches you a lot about like motivations and emotions and sort of like, you start seeing like Greek tragedies play out in some ways, right? Or like Shakespearean sort of like characters form. And from that standpoint too, it's like really interesting. And that's why I always encourage like young people, instead of working at a big company, like go work at a small company that's growing really quickly or making a lot of decisions, because repeatedly bumping up against that wall is what's going to make you give you the experience you need to eventually be successful.
I'm so glad you shared that. There's a couple things I want to pull on there. The idea fit versus product market fit. I'd actually slide another one in there, which is going from idea market fit to solution market fit and then product market fit, which a lot of startups conflate all the time. And what we do, with Ripple companies is try to get them to stop, pause, and think, how can they collect as many data points as possible before moving to solution market fit? And then only when the solution starts to have the pull from customers saying, I need this, I need to pay for this now, is when you feel like you're getting into the product market fit. You really got to stop and slow down while speeding up. And then the comparison to sort of like everyone thinks, large corporates are like massive Titanic ships, which take a lot of people and a lot of decisions to turn left, versus a startup, which is like a speedboat. And it takes one person at the steering wheel to just move their left arm and the whole thing just changes direction. Well, the reason why, people value startups to be able to go back and forth from pivot to pivot is because they don't have a lot of people making decisions. And now you understand why everyone who's trying to build something really quickly should be making a lot of drastic decisions. They shouldn't stay on the same path over and over, because then they're basically not being impacted by the signal and the feedback they're getting from their customers or potential market. So a lot of things there you expressed, and I'm glad that it worked out for you and the team at Teamable. It sounds like it was a mixture of brute force, a lot of hustle and grit, and a little bit of luck to make it work in the end of the day, right?
Yeah, and I would say we certainly could have been more successful, right? Like I think we could have had a lot more impact. I'm really happy for the folks that continue to persevere at the organization. Obviously, the eventual acquirer benefited tremendously from Teamable's technology and insights. And I hope that, now that company has changed its name to Teamable, like I hope they continue to have tremendous impact. Hiring still remains a very big problem in the market. And there's just a lot of values left to be created there.
Very exciting. Before we get into what you're currently working on at SecurityPal, there was a little bit of a gap in your entrepreneurial journey where you ended up taking a role as a scout at Craft Ventures and made a bunch of angel investments. So I want to understand, how did you make your way into the investing world as an angel investor and eventually over to the great team at Craft?
I wouldn't say like my job as an angel investor is like, it's not something I would actually really think about. I think there's like aspects of this that are like pretty, it's not like forced. Like, I have a bunch of founders that reach out to me that need help. And then occasionally they're like, oh, I'd love for you to be an investor and I want to help out. And so like, got connected with Brian Murray and the team over at Craft, and they had this program. And so that's how it ended up happening. I got introduced by Pete Kazanji, who was one of the co-founders of TalentBin, and then now a co-founder at this company called Atrium, which does like, data-driven sales management and analytics. They have a great product that we're customers of. And so, he was the one that really made the introduction over to Brian Murray and the Craft team. And Brian Rosenblatt, who runs that scout program, I think does like a really good job of it. Craft Ventures also had sort of a meteoric rise in some ways. And with David Sachs and like the team there, given just like the breadth and exposure to like the market and what they've accomplished, especially in B2B SaaS, is pretty tremendous. So I guess I was just like lucky, honestly, that I knew like the right people. And then lucky that like I had people that wanted me to be part of the journey with them. I think there's also certain people where you're like, you feel good supporting them, right? I think it feels good to like invest in friends' companies or invest in, even if it's a small check. Like sometimes I've written a check as small as $1,000. It has little to no meaning, but I think it's just like, I'm really glad I got to support this person. And it doesn't really, the return almost doesn't matter. It's at the end of the day, it's going to be about relationships. And so I always look at it as like, oh, like, can I support this person and in whatever way I can. I think relationships over the long run just matter so much more. And that's like what I really look forward to building.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, working with Brian and David over at Craft has been some of the best relationships we've had, having David as an LP in our fund and Brian and the team over there as a co-investor in VoiceFlow with us has just been an amazing relationship. So surrounding yourself with great people like that is not just done by luck, but by hard work that you did early on. And for them wanting to work with someone as great as you makes a ton of sense. Now, you did end up starting a new venture, SecurityPal, at the beginning of the pandemic, which, you were working on in stealth for a couple of years before announcing, the live launch recently. But first, I got to ask, how did you stumble upon the problem to solve in the first place? And why did you think you were the right person to solve it?
There's definitely like a pretty big like mission and vision behind SecurityPal, which it's one of those like really famous quotes from Steve Jobs where you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only sort of like connect them looking backwards. When I was at Teamable, I realized like very quickly, and this was post May 2018. And if you talk to anybody in the world of cybersecurity or compliance, they'll know the date May 2018 pretty quickly because that was when GDPR went live in Europe, and it was it sort of led to like a frenzy of companies trying to figure out, well, what does this mean for us? GDPR being the general data protection legislation that Europe enacted in 2018. And there were a lot of like, there was a lot of noise, there was a lot of misinformation. But one of the things that it definitely led to was companies needing to have a greater level of scrutiny with regards to the vendors and third parties that it works with. right? And so, as somebody that's like working on a small tech company that very few people knew about at that time, Teamable, I realized like, hey, we went from this period of like being able to close deals. We even had like this one deal that I was leading where it was a biotechnology company, and I had sent them the agreement, and like red lines were done in like 2 emails, and then they like sent back like a signed version. We thought it was going to take like 2 more weeks to close it, but it was like I was like, wow, like this is like really fast. And then like post like GDPR 2018, I'm just like, it's like weeks and weeks of just like back and forth with like questionnaires and privacy and security and all this other stuff. And so the thing that I really like to say here is there's something that's fundamentally changed about commercial transactions over the past 5 years. And I think companies are only finally beginning to realize what that means for their go-to-market efforts. If I could put it, in a sort of metaphor, it used to be the case that like the last mile of a deal was like, an Indy racetrack, straight shot, you go 200 miles an hour, you close the deal, right? You get it done in a couple of weeks. Now there's just a tremendous amount of topography in the last mile of a commercial transaction. And so the last mile can potentially take you like 50% of a sales cycle. So I started thinking about these issues like pretty rigorously, even back in 2018. And one of the things I realized was like, hey, look at what's happening. These rules are being enacted that are actually favorable to the biggest companies, because companies that have like sort of skirted or, let's say not been fully transparent with their users about the manner in which they grew. And we can maybe name some of these social networks and stuff like that. They took advantage of just very lax regulations to grow really quickly. And then now on the other side of GDPR, like I just don't think it's going to be as easy to like build, your next Facebook or like your LinkedIn today, just because there's just so much red tape. I thought that was like a pretty significant threat to innovation, right? Because I think the whole idea of Silicon Valley is anybody could change the world from a garage. And I'm just like, well, now you kind of need to have 2 garages. You need one for yourself and then one for like your privacy lawyers and your compliance team. So like, how are we gonna do that? How are we gonna support early stage companies, a founder with like maybe not that much funding to like build and scale? So this was an idea that I had early on, and I think innovation is like fundamental to like growth and economies and nation states. I think innovation and growth are like the reasons why democracies have historically worked, because they were a means. They created the institutions that sort of cleared the way for structured innovation and structured growth to take place. These are things I think about all the time. And I'm pro regulation. I'm pro smart regulation. Maybe not necessarily more regulation. If we're not smart with the ways in which we're regulating the internet and commerce on the internet, we can rapidly spiral down a path where we're not. It can get quite dangerous, I think, pretty quickly if we don't have that growth. I think growth solves a lot of problems. It's as true within startups, and you probably see this, Matt, looking at hundreds of startups where companies that start to stop growing or taper off, there's a lot of like infighting and stuff like that. Companies that are growing really quickly, people just suck it up because they know that a rising tide lifts all boats, and issues don't end up being, small issues stay small, right? And so that was like the big picture, right? Like, wow, like here, there's potentially like a serious threat to this over the next 100 years. And part of the reason why I say 100 years is because I look at like the Standard Oil and Carnegie Steel. If you look at like the 1800s and the 1900s, the types of like regulations that got established at that time, the Sherman and Clayton antitrust legislation really was responsible for breaking up Standard Oil, breaking up like a lot of these like monopolies, these integrated monopolies. And that actually, in some ways, maybe there's an argument to be made is like that prevented, that increased the barrier to entry for new companies, such that like if you look at like why haven't we made more progress on climate change? Sometimes I think, well, the hurdle to building an energy company is actually like tremendously large, right? There's just like so much regulation and stuff like that. So like those are like some of my like core beliefs. And I looked at that and I'm like, why did it take us so long to build Tesla? Why did it take us so long to build another car company? And it becomes really obvious, like once you start like looking at how are like the incentive structure between like the nation state and the existing companies. So that's like really, really large, big picture, right? We're a security questionnaires company. That's what SecurityPal is. So let me bring it down. I was like, well, this is sort of like security questionnaires. Given that they're a speed bump on the path to unlocking revenue, we got to solve this. Here's our big picture mission and vision, but we got to solve this thing. And this thing was clearly slowing revenue. It was for us at my previous company. I talked to more founders. I left Teamable. I moved to an advisor role. I wanted to explore some of these ideas more. Really wanted to explore commercial, how do we speed up commercial transactions? Because if we speed up commercial transactions, we speed up innovation. If we speed up innovation, we speed up growth. And growth is, I think, the elixir, right? And so that's how I ended up on this idea of SecurityPal. I talked to a bunch of companies. They were like, yes, if you are able to help us fill out these security questionnaires, it'll be amazing. And I was like, great, I'll do it. I'll stay up all night and I'll do it. And so that's what I did. For my first cohort of customers, I would work during the day and I would literally fill out questionnaires. And if you look back at our earlier product usage, there's questionnaires that are shipped out late into the night at 4 a.m., 5 a.m. It's literally just me. They thought it was a product, but it was just me in the back end doing everything, because I wanted to get the experience right. I really wanted to make sure that what does the user need? The user, at the end of the day, it was here's a salesperson, here's a sales rep or a security engineer, right? Or a compliance person. They've got a really busy schedule. They've got this document that needs to be filled out. They can spend 3 hours to fill it out, but they don't have it on their calendar. I've got 3 hours between 9 p.m. and midnight. I'll just do it. And so, I send it back. They get everything done. And then, Atrium came on board, Airtable, Figma, and then I just started being referred. And then that's how it happened. And I did honestly, it was growing too quickly that I didn't have time to fundraise. I had a bunch of investors reaching out to me. And I just was let me just grow through revenue. And it was a lesson that I learned from Teamable, where I was just I don't want money. I need customers, and I need customers that are paying me. And I always believe that you have more leverage in the market if you focus on customers. That's the greatest way to gain leverage in the capitalist ecosystem that we live in. Your investors will love you only as much as you have growth. And your employees will love you only as much as you're willing to sort of provide them with good salary and good growth opportunities and benefits. But you can get investors and you can get employees if you're a company that's growing really fast. And the best way to grow really fast is to get customers. So if I have any advice, it's just double down on customers, you'll get more revenue. You'll get more investors. Double down on customers, you'll get more employees wanting to work with you. And so I was just I'm just going to focus on customers. And, we bootstrapped it to 7 figures in ARR in around a year. And it was literally just a handful of people. And then that was what allowed us to position ourselves successfully for fundraise. Long story short, I know we went from the 1800s to today, all that other stuff, but there's a clear sort of motivation behind why I'm doing this. I think we're going to win because of that motivation. I'm not just doing it to make a bunch of money. I could have done that when I bootstrapped it to $1 million and just run $1 million company where I'm getting paid right off the top. That's fine. But I think it's so much more meaningful to be our country's in trouble. We need growth, and we got to find a way to save ourselves and our companies from being bogged down by all of this noise.
So you basically went from 0 to the 100,000-foot view and said, oh my God, we need to change the world. And then went back to staying up all night long to fill out 3-hour security questionnaires. And this is the way I'm going to save the world. Yeah. By doing something that nobody at Figma or Airtable wants to do, which is probably shocking to hear for a lot of our audience. But I totally understand what you're saying, because I lived through that experience of watching engineers and our CTOs lose weeks, if not months of sleep trying to fill out these technical questionnaires. I mean, we had to go through a similar thing with my last company during the MiFID, which is the financial instruments derivatives program that was coming out at the same time as GDPR. It came out a few months before. So I know exactly what you mean by how GDPR really scared the crap out of a lot of startups and corporate leaders out there. So maybe bring it back to the 100-foot level instead of the 100,000-foot level on, what exactly is a security questionnaire, and why the hell are they such a pain in the ass to experience?
Yeah, let me explain this. So security questionnaire, essentially what it is if you're running a company, right, it generally comes up in B2B SaaS. Although we have surprisingly large, publicly traded companies that you've definitely heard of that are not in the world of B2B SaaS that also experience this issue. What it is when you're selling your product, you may be able to convince the business user that like you have the right product, and the business unit's really excited about using it, right? So like when Figma is like going to market, they have one of the most amazing products, right? And they might be selling to like a big bank, and the bank might say, "Hey, you guys have an amazing product. We want to use it. We want to deploy it all across our organization. We just need to make sure that your security posture aligns with our requirements as a big bank." Figma has all the certifications. It's one of the most secure products in the world. It's got the engineers and all that other stuff. But that data, that's good. But now you have to transform that data to hit all the points that this big bank is asking for. And generally, what like the most basic version of this is you want to close a deal with a customer, usually like an enterprise, and the enterprise like fill out this form. And literally the form, it's like one of the most like annoying forms ever, right? Like you double click on it, it's like has like macros enabled sometimes. It's got like 20 tabs. It's got questions anywhere from like, sometimes it's like, do you have armed guards outside your data centers? And you're like, we don't have data centers. We're on AWS, we're on GCP. I guess they do, right? Like, you can't even find data centers on like, you actually, like, they're like, there's like black sites, right? Like, it's really funny. Like sometimes like there's this one scenario where like this big bank was like, well, we really need to know where your like cloud data centers are. And so like I was like working with a customer and I was just like, yeah, why don't you just tell them that like literally nobody knows where the cloud data centers are? Like you can go like look at their website and they specifically say we don't disclose the addresses.
Northeast.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a Northeast Virginia region or West or whatever. They're not going to disclose the sites for security reasons. But that's what it is. It's a form that you have to fill out to prove your security posture. And they're bespoke. Every company has unique forms. And you're wondering, why isn't there like a common app version of this or like one standard? There isn't, because people, companies have different sets of incentives. Like they have like unique products. They feel like security teams are sometimes optimizing for different things, right? Protection against different things. So like, it's like, that's part of the reason why like we haven't seen standardization. We've seen many attempts at standardization through standard forms, whatnot. You can Google them, right? Standard security questionnaire forms. It just hasn't been adopted. And by the way, when you're a small company and you're trying to close like Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan, and they're like, hey, we need to fill out your security questionnaire. Are you really going to be like, we understand that you have a security questionnaire, but we want you to use our process. Yeah, like the 5 to 10% teams process of like a product that like they haven't even heard of. No, what you want to do is you want to find like the quickest path to yes. And so it's part of the reason why like a lot of companies, like, SecurityPal makes a lot of sense. If you're growing quickly and you're seeing a lot of these questionnaires and you just want to offload it. And we've essentially figured out a way where you could send us any questionnaire at any time, anywhere in the world, right? We've got customers in Australia and Europe, and we will get it turned around for you in as little as like 24 hours. And with like 97 to 98% like completion accuracy. And we've got customers that love that. We are basically creating, remember when I said earlier, like the last mile of a deal has a lot of topography? Well, we're just going to freaking drill right through that topography. And we're going to make sure that this commercial transaction that should have happened 2 weeks ago happens now. And you might say like, it's 2 weeks. 2 weeks doesn't really matter, right? Well, I think 2 weeks matters, right? Like we're like, it's all about compounding. So there was this like really large pharmaceutical company, one of which has like built a vaccine for COVID. And they were trying to onboard a product, and that product was one of our customers. And that customer had to fill out this big pharma's like questionnaire. And I was telling my team, like, guys, we can make this transaction happen like up to a month faster. And it may not seem like a lot, but like extrapolate that, compound that month over the course of 10 years. Like somebody literally like onboarding a product 1 month faster, creating value 1 month faster could mean like just much faster, better drug development 10 years down the line. I mean, if you don't believe in the power of compounding, like you're just not going to, people are not going to understand how powerful it can be to deploy things even 1 week or 1 day earlier.
Yeah, but not only that though, Pukar, like, and you think about a sales funnel, as a B2B sales organization, you've got like the weightings from like, lead inbound to opportunity to negotiation to legal review to final sign off. And usually in between sort of legal review and final sign off is the security questionnaire stage. And that is maybe only 10% waiting in your CRM, but from the customer side, it's like a 90% problem for them because so many businesses, I've researched a bit on the sort of market for how much dependency sits on outside vendors. There is so much of companies living in the cloud and having so much dependency on third-party systems. There's over 50% of businesses surveyed that say all the risks that they see for the future and they're inside their business is because of an outside vendor being hacked. So it makes total sense why these processes need to be dealt with, and they can't just rely on the 10-person startups questionnaire to be able to close the deal. And obviously you fill that gap, but maybe give us a little bit of a sense of like what actually exists inside these questionnaires, not, for every specific one, but generally speaking, and how should a startup founding team think about preparing for these as they get into those larger negotiations?
Yeah, so this is great. This is hyper tactical. So the types of questions that are going to be in questionnaires are generally questions as simple as like, do you encrypt data? How do you encrypt it? Right? At rest and in transit, right? Where's your data stored? How is is it multi-tenant environment? If you're using your own data centers, how are they protected? If you're using a cloud data center, what are like the types of security frameworks that you're using to protect data in there? Things like, what are you doing to protect against like firewall breaches or DDoS attacks, all this other stuff. So standard questions, and then also HR questions, also privacy related questions. They want to know your entire security posture. And I think like going through exercises like a SOC 2 or going through exercises like an ISO, getting some of these certifications, it helps you think about it. But you don't have to wait for that to implement those policies, right? A lot of people think like you need a third party to be like, to be all right, you have been blessed with SOC 2. Yeah, but like you can implement those policies yourself. And if you are able to prove that you do those things through documentation and through internal policies, you can say like, yeah, like our standards, for the most part, align with SOC 2 standards, and we're on our way to doing that as well. Just knowing what companies are looking for and what sort of clarity companies are looking for, right, is super important. And a lot of these exercises are not complex. There's templated policies online about what is a business continuity plan? What is a disaster recovery plan? What is an encryption policy? What is a clean desk policy? Right? All this, these are policies you can find online. You can Google them. Literally, if you're a startup, take like 5 hours over the course of a weekend. If you're a founder, CEO, Google these policies, read them, digest them, CC your co-founders and your senior leadership on them. Create a Slack channel. Create some calendar invites to review them on a quarterly or annual basis. You've got the beginnings of a security policy, right? And what you really want to do is you also want to have a white paper. And a lot of times you might be like, well, a white paper will include links to some of these policies, right? A white paper can also include links to what is GCP's security policy, because you're essentially relying on their security to protect your customers' data, right? What is Slack's security policy, right? So one of the things I always tell startups is you don't have to spend tens of thousands of dollars. You don't have to do this in order to like close enterprises. You can close enterprises today. You just need to be a little bit thoughtful. You need to make sure that you've demonstrated that you've thought about this and you have a plan. And you can close some of those deals and use that funding to then go after a SOC 2 and some of this other stuff. So it's really important as a startup, if you're a B2B SaaS, you should definitely have a security white paper. And reach out to us and reach out to me, Pukar at SecurityPalHQ.com, and we can like share with you some sample white papers as well as like how to get that done. These are like one of the most fundamental things that you could do at the earliest stages to be prepared for this. And then if you have a questionnaire, I would say, if you have a questionnaire, don't reach out to us. Fill it out yourself. Experience the pain, right, of going through this. Understand these types of questions. Whenever we have a new startup come to us and like they're like, we think we're about to get questionnaires, and I always ask like, have you filled them out? Because if you haven't filled them out, like, I'm not going to take your money. I want you to fill them out. I want you to get a handful of these. I want you to experience it, understand it. And then once it becomes a big enough problem, then reach out to us and we can help you.
I love that. I mean, you just really nailed it on the head there. So many founders are, kick the can down the road. It costs too much time, takes too much money to deal with this. I'll worry about it later. We have companies who are going through SOC 2 now. All of our investments are B2B SaaS companies, so they all eventually have to go through it. But they wait till the Series A or Series B. Oh, I don't need to go through SOC 2 type 1, type 2 right now. I'll wait till later. But exactly what you said is no, start early, take the 5-10 hours over a course of a couple weekends, put together a security questionnaire so you at least have a head start when those conversations do come up with your very large first big enterprise SaaS customer. So I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, besides the strenuous part that can lead to burnout for all your engineers and security teams at a startup, as you mentioned, it's also very stressful for the sales team because they've got so much riding on selling this large customer to, let's say, a big bank. And it all rides on this one security questionnaire that maybe they've never experienced before and they have no process. So can you kind of explain to us what the typical process for a startup looks like when they get brought into a security questionnaire? And how does it typically play out for most startups in your experience?
Generally, it's a little bit of a hot potato situation, right? We've got this like Spider-Man meme that just won't die. It's literally like a bunch of Spider-Mans pointing at each other being like, it's like sales engineering and solutions engineering and like security and operations and account executives just pointing at it. Like, are you going to do it? Because it's literally just like some of the most boring work you'll do. Like you have to sit there and like fill out these forms of like questions and come up with, and sometimes it can also feel like unnerving, right? Like it's like, I don't want to get anything wrong. Like what if I'm saying like the wrong thing? So it's like this exercise that just has a lot of stress. Not only is it a hackneyed exercise, it's also like a stress-inducing exercise, especially if you don't know, like have a lot of the context. And generally, like it'll come into either like the account executive or the customer support person, or maybe like a sales engineering type of organization. And then if the salesperson feels like they can do it on their own, like some salespeople are really good, like some AEs like understand this, they can fill it out on their own. They insert all the right links and information. Vast majority of them, that's not their forte. It's not their comparative advantage. So they usually forward it to like the security or the CTO or the CEO and be like, hey, we need to get this done in order. It's kind of like legal red lines, right? You get like the red lines in. If they're basic enough, like basic stuff like logo or like the address being updated and stuff like that, you'll be okay with it. If it feels more complex, then you'll forward it on. And then and it'll just sit there because a CEO, CTO, security engineer, they're busy. They're busy folks, right? In a startup, at a scale company, there's like security organizations, there's heads of security that get looked at, compliance leaders, GRC leaders, and then it'll just sit there. And part of the reason is because people just don't have the time to like open it and deal with it. And then eventually, like the AE will follow up, the salesperson will follow up, they'll nudge, and they'll eventually like drag it through the finish line. But it'll take weeks, right? We had a customer where they were like, "Yeah, it takes us like 4 weeks to fill out one of these." We went in there. Turnaround time was like a couple of days, and it just was like and the amount of like one of the things that I think is underappreciated about what we're doing is like there's a lot of like surface area for antagonistic posturing between like sales and security because they don't understand each other's like roles, right? Between sales, security, and compliance. Because sales is like, we got to bring in revenue. If we don't, like we're going to miss our quotas and we're not going to grow as fast. And security and compliance are like, well, yeah, like, but we got to focus on core security work, and we got to prevent hacks because it could potentially cost like millions of dollars, or like, could be like company killing. And so, like, both of those sides are right. The commercial transaction still has to occur. And so, one of the things we've really noticed is just like how much better the relationship is that SecurityPal customers have between their internal organizations, right? Between security, sales, and compliance, because we're like absorbing a lot of that pain and surface area for disagreement and just like chopping it up and getting it done. That's something that really excites me as well about what we're building. But yeah, it's like the classic analogy that I like to use, it's like a pinball machine. Like these things get pinballed across the organization, and it's not fun.
No, one thing you touched on just, that is very important is about the sort of miscommunication between what the, security team and what the sales team wants to respond to. I've seen some of these questionnaires with over 300 questions in them, and providing the correct answer is very critical. And it also is, potentially liable for the wrong answer. So I've heard companies that have answered, affirmatively for one security control, but didn't actually have that in place. There could be a costly breach to them. So how do you advise companies to make sure they don't embellish an answer based on what they plan to offer versus what they currently have in place?
Yeah. So the golden rule here is, always tell the truth, but you can also make sure that when you're telling the truth, you can talk about your plans for how this is going to improve, right? You might say like, listen, we don't have a SOC 2 right now. That's perfectly fine. But if you've done a little bit of thinking about your security policy, which I talked about, right? If you spend 5 to 10 hours, you can start building the beginnings of a plan of how you might get to SOC 2, right? And so like a bad answer is like, no, we don't have SOC 2. A better answer is we don't have SOC 2 right now, but we have a standing meeting with our CTO every 2 weeks. Security is one of the agenda items. And we're now beginning to build a plan for SOC 2. And we believe we can attain a type 1 by H2 of next year. And then after that, we'll go for a type 2. Think about that. It provides just so much more context. And by the way, just so you know, a lot of your data is housed, the vast majority of our customer data is housed in GCP. Here are GCP security controls. There's only a handful of engineers that have access to the production environment. And those engineers that have access to the production environment, it's through multi-factor authentication on company-owned devices that we have full control over. Think about like how much richer that latter response is versus just saying no, right? And it's about communicating to your customer. It's about providing customer assurance, right? This is what this exercise is in. Companies are now more intertwined than ever before. Companies are using more third-party applications than ever before. They have a right to know if the products that they're using are A, secure, and B, have a plan for improving their security and compliance. You have to be the one that matches up with those expectations, right? This is the world that we're living in. And it's only going to get more, and these questions are not going to go away. Right? That's one thing that a lot of founders have this misconception that if I get the certification, I don't have to worry about it. You will get more security questionnaires post SOC 2 than before. You will get more security questionnaires and more security questions asked post certifications. We've seen it over and over again. These things are not going away. There's like 120 countries working on their own version of GDPR. Nationalism and regionalism is on the rise. There's a lot of these like macro political trends that are happening, which is like, go back to 100,000 foot view, like most commerce happened off the internet. And so what the nation states would do is they were just worried about commerce off the internet. They were worried about commerce in meat space because that's where they collected the taxes. That's where they collected the revenue to operate their institutions. Commerce has moved onto the internet. But on the internet, they don't have the same, nation states don't have the same sophistication on the internet that they did off the internet. So now these new tools, new regulations, new regulatory bodies are being created to essentially be able to, how do we make sure that like this thing that is the internet, commerce on the internet, that we ultimately have control over it, that we are able to collect taxes, we're able to understand what's happening with the data of our citizens, right? And so that is something that very few people understand. But if you understand that, it's really obvious why we're headed in a world where there's only going to be more regulation here, not less. There's only going to be more sets of questions and questionnaires.
Yeah, I love it. You brought it back to the 100,000 foot view, but gave, real good nuggets for founders to think about. Day one, don't wait for your SOC 2 and then just set it and forget it. Get going on your security framework. Think about researching, Google Cloud or AWS frameworks and their own security answers. So you can put those into your responses early on to show that you have more than just a yes or no answer, which is really important. But you've got some incredible customers already. You mentioned early on that you got work with Figma and Airtable and Loom. That's an amazing roster of early stage startups, great stage companies for you to be working with as an early stage startup. So first off, how did you get them to trust you as sort of a consultant advisor to help them close some large corporate customers? And how much was at stake for their own business in trusting you?
Well, one of the things that I did from very early on was I was upfront about the way in which, especially the early cohort of customers, of exactly what was going to happen and the type of data that we needed access to. What's interesting is you don't need access to any integrations or production environment to fill out a security questionnaire. You just need to know what the security posture is. And that's usually just like metadata. And so it ended up being like a straightforward relationship. We had NDAs and all this other stuff as I was like building the product in the early stage. And then I just like constantly work with them constantly. And a lot of them were referrals, right? So like I got to go through our like I'd work with one customer, they would refer me to another customer. And I also did have security frameworks. I did have security policies. I had research and stuff, right? Because I had to understand what did all of these things mean. And I had documented those things as well to demonstrate to companies that, hey, we've thought about this. And the other risk, the other thing that like really minimized the risk here is that we had a very small footprint. It was only a handful of people, and like we didn't need access to a lot of like of your customer data and stuff like that. So those are like some things to think about. That was like another thing that I was based out of San Francisco. My team was here, and all this. I still am, and so a lot of those like things factored in. But really, it was just about we did really great work. We're really upfront about what we have. We're really upfront about our plans. We're really upfront about our security policies. We're really upfront about like the level of data access that we needed, which was minimal. And we did great work. We solved the problem for them, and that's what led to all of the referrals and growth.
I love it. I mean, obviously it worked because you recently announced your first round of VC funding after bootstrapping it to over $1 million in recurring revenue with a $21 million Series A. So congratulations on that. And obviously working with Craft as a venture scout worked out for you because Craft led the round along with some A16Z investors and a dozen of incredible angel investors, including the co-founder and CEO of Okta and COO at Asana. So, you did all of this without a pitch deck from my understanding. So first off, can you tell us how that process went down and how did you get such a great group of investors without a pitch deck?
Yeah, I was pretty contrarian around like not having a pitch deck because like I thought like the most important thing, again, going back to what I said earlier, was what are the customers saying and how much are they paying? And like, I think that's like fundamentally the thing that matters. We had a cohort of great customers that were raving about us. And what I wanted to do is I just wanted to let our customers do the talking. And so to the extent that you can have your customers do the talking and then talk about how much revenue and how you're bringing in, talk about the types of deals you're closing. We had a lot of 6-figure deals. We had deals approaching 7 figures. That's the type of data points that investors really want to see. And I was also really lucky that I was surrounded by like great mentors who were willing to make introductions, right? I think a lot of the times, again, like I'm really lucky when it comes to like, at least this fundraising cycle, because I had a great set of investors. I had great people surrounding me that were willing to make the introductions. And a lot of times an intro goes like a long way, right? It goes much further. There's that inbuilt trust. I understood that as like the founder of, co-founder of Teamable, right? This like referral-based solution. It goes back to my point about like, not being able to connect the dots looking forward, but only looking backwards. Like I feel like my entire like startup journey to this point has led me to like build SecurityPal, and led me to like build it exactly in the way that I'm doing it thus far, with like the relying heavily on the network, relying heavily on referrals, asking for feedback, asking for help, and just focusing on customers and focusing on product market fit. I've relied heavily on stories of customers that started out paying us 4 figures, then quickly went to 3 figures, then went to 4 figures, then went to 5 figures, then went to 6 figures, all in a span of 6 weeks. Like less than a quarter, right? Just because we were delivering so much value, we were absorbing and breaking down so much of their pain. And so that's what I relied heavily on. Those customer testimonials, they were there. I mean, I had done sales ops before, so like we had the data, we had our ARR numbers, we had our customer numbers all in Salesforce, like neatly and nicely tracked. And so it was less where, I just knew that if I focused more on the customers, if I talked about the customer stories, like we are like absolutely customer obsessed here. Our top 2 channels are on Slack are customer happiness and customer sadness.
Yeah, I'm Pukar. I mean, I keep hearing you talk about luck, but honestly, I don't believe that luck helped you get to where you are. It was purely hard work and hustle and putting yourself in the right place at the right time and taking advantage of opportunities to work alongside people like Craft and other amazing operators in the Valley and stuff like that. So I appreciate your humbleness, to say the least, but I definitely think you worked your way to generate that luck, working smart and hard.
It comes back to one of my like favorite life lessons, which, we might get to here soon, which is like, I believe in playing the long game, right? And I didn't always believe that, but I think now I know more than ever, right? Like I think about my grandkids a lot. I just got married and I don't have children, but it's weird. But I've been thinking about my grandkids since I was like 25. It's probably when like my frontal cortex fully developed. But it's about like, what are my grandkids going to say about me? And what are their kids going to say about me, right? I'm an immigrant to this country. I've been very fortunate by what the U.S. has, the opportunities that U.S. has afforded me, right? And there's a tremendous amount of luck. Like in my entire life is a story about, very grateful to the immigration judge that let my parents come here, right? Very grateful to like, Stanford for like, admitting me. there were a lot of people that probably equally deserve those spots. So I think luck has like continued to play those parts. I always say like I'm on like the longest streak of heads that you'll ever know, right? Like that's basically like one of my life mottos. But when something gets me down, like I just think about playing the long game. Hopefully, I make it to 80 and 90. I have a walking treadmill here that I'm trying to use as a way to continue to be healthy in these types of meetings. And then I just want my grandkids to be able to be proud of me.
That's amazing. You know what your grandkids are going to say? They're going to say, "Wow, you really filled out security questionnaires for a living. How could you not be making TikTok videos like everyone else?"
Probably. Actually.
That's how you change the world. Not filling out questionnaires, Pukar. Filling out TikTok surveys is better.
Well, we talk with our marketing leader all the time. Like, we should just make TikToks of like filling out security questionnaires. It's just going to be the most boring fucking TikToks. Like,
absolutely not. Have you seen the woman who does the cheat sheets on the Excel cheat sheets? That is like one of the biggest TikTok accounts out there. I love it.
That is true. That is true.
You got to get in on it. Well, you answered our last fast favorite first. So why don't we just jump into it before we wrap things up? Your first is your favorite podcast.
My favorite podcast right now is The Memo by Howard Marks. I really admire Howard Marks' ability to articulate what's happening in the world, and he's just such a different type of investor and financial thinker than like anybody that I've consumed. And so, really enjoying listening to his memos and then takes on his memos, like analysis on it.
That's a great one. Your next is your favorite newsletter or blog.
Yeah, there's this really great blog from a college friend of mine called Of Dollars and Data. It's at ofdollarsandData.com. It's a fellow Stanford alum, a friend of mine. His name is Nick Majuli. He does these like great sort of breakdowns of like life lessons, but through the lens of like personal finance and finance. He's the COO of this wealth management firm called Ritholtz Wealth Management. You should follow him. He's an amazing guy. Yeah, Barry Ritholtz and gang. Yeah,
I follow them. Barry Ritholtz. Yeah, they have a good podcast too. Next is your favorite tech gadget.
My air purifier.
Which one do you got?
I think I have like a Koei or like whatever. I bought it from Amazon. I looked at a couple of reviews and it's really good. I've got one here and then one upstairs. And sometimes my wife and I will be cooking. We live in a loft, so like it's we make delicious food, but we don't want our clothes to smell like that. So we gotta turn it on. And then we're in San Francisco. California occasionally gets these wildfires and smoky days, and so really handy, great technology. Love my air purifier.
That's a great one. Next, your favorite new trend?
Favorite from like one that I'm most interested in, and not favorite as in like I necessarily like this, is rising interest rates. Is probably like my the one that I'm like most curious about. The ability for this trend to so quickly shift incentives and the game theory around just like how people operate is fascinating. You're seeing it in small interactions. So much has shifted between the dynamic of like the founders and investors and LPs. And so I'm very, very keen on what this new era means for business and technology.
Very dystopian of you, but I agree with you because it allows us to actually see who the real entrepreneurs are and the real business builders are, and not in a time when everyone gets funded for whatever crappy idea they come out with, like NFTs. So I completely agree with you on that one. And I guess last but not least, your favorite book, since you already answered the favorite life lesson. Favorite book?
I was looking at like my bookshelf behind me and just realizing how many books I need to finish. I'm always like, whenever I see a bunch of bookshelves, I'm like, did you read these? I'm definitely not one that has read all these. I'm like a big like buy the book and read a couple of pages and then not finish type person. I'll openly admit it. But one that I really love is Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. It was that, and there's about like 5 or 6 other books that I read right before I started SecurityPal that were tremendously influential in and just fascinated by Phil Knight as a business leader and just the manner and in the way and he went about it. He was like working at PwC, an accounting firm for like 10 years while he was like building. Like, I mean, I'm just like really fascinated by anybody that has that much stamina. Like, speaking of TikTok, right? Like we want that instant dopamine burst. Like I don't know if we have enough like founders and builders today that have stamina to build something that lasts 2-3 years or go through like the slog of 2 to 3 years and to do something like for 10 years, 20 years. I'm also fascinated by it because I'm trying to build SecurityPal. I want SecurityPal to make it to the year 2100. I want it to be something that I like. I want to be one of those like old founders that like has a company that sort of outlives them. And so I feel like Nike is one of those companies. So yeah, fascinated by that.
I mean, it dovetails perfectly into your last one, which is your favorite life lesson, which is play the long game, which I think, is necessary, especially in these markets. And, I've told my investors I'm on to this journey for the next 20, 25 years. I told my wife, don't expect a salary for the first 5 years. And so I'm trying to hold my promise to her on that. But agreed, it is an important thing to learn, especially during this journey. And I'm wishing you the most success with SecurityPal and seeing this into 2100 and up to that 100,000 foot view when you save the world. So thank you for joining us in the tank today with Pukar Hamal from SecurityPal.
Thank you, Matt. Really appreciate it. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Tank Talks. To learn more about this episode, be sure to go to Apple Podcast or Spotify to find more detailed notes on this episode or to check out previous episodes. Also, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and a rating as it helps us out a lot. And hit that subscribe button so you can get notified when new episodes come out. Finally, make sure to give me a follow on Twitter @MattyBCohen or @Tank Talk Podcast to stay up to date on new episodes or to be a guest on our show. Till next time,